I would love to welcome our next speaker of the day, Gary Hamel, author of the book Humanocracy and also visiting professor in London School of Business. And we're going to have Gary talk about reinventing the workplace, harnessing collective genius to redefine work. Super interesting. Look forward to listening to him now. Welcome, Gary. The floor is yours.
Well, hello, everybody. A great pleasure to have some time to spend with you today. Let's see if we can get the right thing sharing here. Give me a moment if you don't mind, and we will figure that out. Here we go. So I have just a very brief time, so there's a lot that I'm going to probably leave unsaid. I apologize for that. If you want to go a little bit deeper, you can in my last book. Here's ways to reach me. If you have a question, please email me. I'll do my best to respond. But let me start with a question. If you think back on all of the kind of HR related innovation over the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and I'm old enough to have been through a lot of hype cycles. AI is only the most recent. But as you think about all of this, how much has this really changed the workplace, the way people feel at work, the willingness of people to bring their very best to work? And I would argue it hasn't changed it very much at all. And we're going to talk about why, what we can do about that. Long will have seen this kind of data. This is Gallup. They've been doing this for years and years. And it's super depressing if you care about people at work. Globally, only like less than a quarter of people are truly engaged in their jobs. The vast majority kind of just show up and go through the motions. And there's a client who are kind of actively disengaged. And of course, when I first started looking at this data many years ago, my assumption was, well, this is about the job. Most jobs are not very inspiring. They're not very engaging. You see people every day who are doing things you are glad you don't have to do. And I hope you tell them thank you for that. But when you look around the world, like pretty much everybody is in the same boat. It's not that anybody has kind of solved this challenge or figured this thing out. And when you ask people about, so like even Oprah, I think would be like a little sad with this. And I think all of us, should be just like a little bit sad about this. And when you ask people, are you satisfied with the actual work you do? The vast majority, right? Like 89% say they're very or somewhat satisfied with the actual task. So how do you explain this gap between just endemic lack of engagement, disengagement, and the fact that, well, the work itself is not so bad? And, there are little clues to that if you go deeper into the data. Another Gallup survey found that 1 out of 2 individuals said they had quit their jobs to kind of get away from an incompetent or tyrannical manager. In another large study, a third, more or less, of the respondents said they would take a significant pay cut if they could fire their boss. So maybe the problem is not so much around the work, but around how we manage people. And that's kind of a little bit where I'm going to go here. Now, you're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. Let me give you a different hierarchy. This is Gary's hierarchy. It's not so famous, but it's a hierarchy of human capabilities at work. And at the bottom, I have obedience, people who show up and abide by the rules, legal rules, regulatory rules, internal policies. This is important. You can't run a large organization without a certain level of obedience. People who work very hard, they stay till the job is done. They take responsibility for results. Diligence, also important. People who have great skills, who are willing to be trained and retrained, equally important. The dilemma is that none of these things create any competitive advantage today. I can buy obedience, diligence, and intellect almost anywhere around the world for almost nothing. So in a highly turbulent economy, in a creative economy, I need more than just that. I need people with great initiative, who are not bound by a job description, who see a problem or an opportunity and they march off to solve it. People who are learning from other industries, challenging conventional wisdom and bringing their imagination to work. And finally, people who see their work is the way they make a difference in the world. This is how they live out the dreams that they have for making a difference to humanity. They bring their passion to the work. And what all that data tells us is that people are not bringing the things at the top of this pyramid, because all of these things are gifts. Every leader lives in a gift economy. And the things that are most important to the success of their team, their organization, are capabilities that people either choose or choose not to bring to work every day. And we know that mostly they choose not to bring these things to work. And, it's not surprising, why. Again, go a little bit deeper into the data. Only 1 in 5 employees believes their opinions matter at work. Only 1 in 8 say they can influence decisions. Only 1 in 11, 9% say they can experiment in any way at work. So this data is here despite 50, 60, 100 years of trying to create organizations that kind of work better for the people inside of it. And you just have to conclude that in many ways we fail. And so this suggests that there's something deeper that we're not getting at here. And clearly, not every organizations don't start out this way. We know that there's a very strong correlation between the size of an enterprise and the amount of engagement. The smaller the enterprise, the more people are engaged. I live in Silicon Valley, and I see all these young companies, and they're distinguished not so much by a business model, but by a different kind of organizational context. People are there because they're going to change the world. The organization is simple. There are very few layers. People naturally migrate to wherever they can add value. Everyone intuitively thinks lean because they're resource constraint. They're open to ideas from the outside. But as you watch these organizations over time, I have to say, all of this changes. You come back a decade or two later, and you find a very different sort of organization. And the question is, why does this happen? Is this like some inevitable process, like aging and senescence in a human life, or is there something else going on? Well, I think it's something else, because as organizations get bigger, they become more bureaucratic, and we assume this is inevitable. But over time, you get more layers, you get more staff groups, more powerful staff groups. Managers become disconnected from people on the front lines. Legal has to sign off on everything, and pretty soon you have an organization that's sclerotic, that's timid, that's inertial and incremental. Not the sort of organization you need in today's world. So I think it's a fairly simple relationship. As bureaucracy per capita goes up, achievement per capita goes down. And you see this in even, in some sense, the most impressive companies. What I would call bureauclerosis. That's the term I would use for this. And let me give you an example. This is Facebook's organization, Inside Meta. This is their technical organization with 9, 10, 11 layers, whatever that is. And you think about, how the hell does this happen? And last year, Mark Zuckerberg kind of commenting on this, he said, I don't think you want a structure that's just managers managing managers, managing managers, managing managers, managing the people who are doing the work. To which I would say, no kidding. This is a really, really bad idea. It is impossible, my friends. It is literally impossible to have an organization with 8 or 9 layers and have an organization that's resilient, adaptable, entrepreneurial. It literally cannot be done. Nobody's ever done it. Nobody's going to do it. So that structure is just a fundamental impediment. Now, here's the challenge in the U.S. economy and in economies around the world. If you look at the U.S. economy since 1983, the number of managers, administrators, support staff has grown by 131%, more than doubled, while all other job categories have grown less than 40%. Our economies are becoming more bureaucratic, not less. And when you unpick this, you see that what's driving this is not external compliance, not regulation. This is internal bureaucracy, more meetings, more process, more rules, and so on. And I don't think that it's an accident that as bureaucracy has gone up, productivity has come down. This is annual productivity growth across the G7. And this has profound implications. Declining productivity makes it more and more difficult to fund our social priorities. Healthcare, education, defense creates more and more income disparity. This is an enormous challenge. And by the way, this productivity growth has been going down, as you can see here, for 40 years and more, despite the fact that we are spending more every year on R&D and more every year on technology. So $5 trillion a year being spent on IT, it has not made the difference, because all of that technology has to be intermediated inside of organizations that are fundamentally bureaucratic, inertial, and incremental at their core. And there's simply not enough startups to change this. So I think I want to argue in this brief time we have that if you really want to build an organization that is as capable as the people inside of it, we really have to go back to kind of almost first principles. And let me just share a simple little representation here of a knowledge structure. In any field of human endeavor, you kind of see this where at the top you have your worldview, your paradigmatic view. Why do people come to work? Why do we need large organizations? That worldview will point you to certain problems and away from other problems. To solve those problems, you need to find the right set of principles. And then you enact those principles and processes that drive practices and finally performance. So if you think back, for example, to the development of democracy, back in the Enlightenment, people like John Locke challenged the sovereignty of the monarch. This was a paradigmatic change. Let's think about the sovereignty of the individual, which leads to a new problem, which is how do people self-govern, which leads to the principles of democracy: one person, one vote, universal suffrage, neutrality before the law, judicial review, freedom of the press. Those principles you find in the processes across all democracies that drive practices and so on. Well, as we've thought about building more capable organizations, we almost never really go back to those paradigmatic beliefs. Instead, we tend to focus on new processes and new practices, and so we're trying to graft often these more human-centered practices onto organizations that were built primarily to solve the problem of efficiency at scale, built on the old principles of standardization, specialization, routinization, formalization. And then we wonder why, whether it's agile or stock ownership plans or anything else, or inclusiveness, why that doesn't make our organizations fundamentally more capable. And it doesn't, because it's trying to graft these new principles onto rotten rootstock. Or to take another analogy, it's like a bit like putting a tutu on a dog and hoping you're going to get a ballerina, and all you get is a stupid looking dog. So in any field of human endeavor, you ultimately reach a point where you cannot solve the new problems without new principles. Whatever technologies you have, they're going to be useless without starting from a different set of principles. So, historically, kind of at the very heart of the bureaucratic model, the fundamental paradigmatic belief, worldview, is that the institution hires individuals to produce products and services and income. The dilemma is, in this way of thinking about it, the individual is the instrument. And if you've ever been in a relationship where your partner looks at you as simply an instrument to make a living, clean up the house, pick up the kids, I can tell you that is a bad relationship. And most employees are still in a toxic relationship with their employer. And you see that in the simple term human resources. What an awful way to think about it. Instead, you ask, what happens if we turn that around? And of course, this is the reality today for Gen X, for Gen Z. They look at the institution as the instrument for building their skills, for making a living, for having impact. And so just this simple shift, is much more profound than you might think. If you really say, if I start with the goal of building an entire management system, an entire organization based on this latter view of human beings, that they're inherently resilient, inherently passionate, inherently entrepreneurial, and how do I help bring those things to the fore, you end up with a very different sort of organization. About a decade ago, after a previous book I'd written called The Future of Management, I had a CEO from China come visit me, Zhang Rumin, the CEO of Haier, the largest appliance company in the world. And he said, Gary, at Haier, we're going to encourage our employees to become entrepreneurs, every employee, because people are not a means to an end, but an end in themselves. And our goal is to let everyone become their own CEO. So I kind of made that argument in one of my previous books that we needed to do this. He asked me that day, Gary, has any company ever done this? I said, I don't think so. He said, I'm going to go do it. And today, Haier is the most radically managed company in the world. Zhang Rumin has been nominated as one of the 50 most influential leaders. Xi Jinping, the premier of China, is hoping this model spreads across all of Chinese enterprise. I don't think it's going to happen. But I want to take you just for a couple minutes inside just this one organization. Now, by the way, I could give you companies doing similar things in healthcare, in steel making, in banking, and so on. So this is not the only example, but I want you to see what happens when you're willing to challenge the bureaucratic status quo. So as I said, largest appliance maker in the world, they own GE Appliances in North America, and their management model is radically different. And by the way, I was the chief transformation officer for 3 years at Hire, so I know the story pretty well. So we started by taking a 50,000 person organization in China and turning it into more than 4,000 micro enterprises. So every employee today works in a business that feels human sized, where they know that they make a difference. Every one of those businesses has its own P&L. Every business has very ambitious targets that are set from the outside in, no internal negotiation. They look at how fast different product segments are growing around the world. And my goal is to double or triple my industry growth. And there are substantial rewards for doing it. I can double or triple my compensation. So high powered rewards and upside, as you'd expect in an entrepreneurial company. Now, every micro enterprise has to sell its services or products. In making this transition at Hire, they took a corporate HR group and they shrunk it from 800 people to 10. And all of those other HR people went into their own micro enterprises and they have to sell their services to other small businesses within Hire. And if no one's willing to buy your services, you go out of business. But there are no internal monopolies. These small micro enterprises can join together to tackle new opportunities, and they do so. They have a way of doing this based on internal contracting using blockchain smart contracts. But the principle is we are not going to set strategy from the top. We want to make it very easy when a new opportunity emerges for micro enterprises to swarm that, to organize around that, to decide how to gain share around that. So this is a very large company that's essentially a community of communities. They believe deeply in open innovation. Every new product at Hire starts out as an open innovation project with typically hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of followers around the world, contributing advice. Most of their tough technical issues get crowdsourced in this kind of a way. So a big believer in harnessing collective intelligence. Every micro enterprise is guaranteed 3 freedoms: the freedom to set strategy, to hire and fire, and to distribute rewards internally. In every micro enterprise, employees can invest in the capital account of that little business. And if the business does well, they get a dividend. So this is what entrepreneurship at scale looks like: strategic decision making, genuine shared ownership, significant upside, and they make it super easy for people to start new businesses. They've started more significant new businesses at Hire than any other enterprise of this size in the world. So now I could show you many other companies that are on this journey, but let me finish with this thought. Today, most of us still work inside organizations that fit the bureaucratic template. And it can be very hard to imagine a radical alternative. You know, one of the questions I ask CEOs today, and I get to meet a lot of them, is can you imagine an organization that is as different from the bureaucratic status quo as Netflix is different from the BBC, as Airbnb is different from Marriott? We have to be able to do this, my friends. We can no longer be stuck inside of this old paradigm. It is simply no longer fit for purpose. You know, bureaucracy as a management model was invented in the 19th century when the average employee was illiterate, when you needed a separate category of employee called a manager to tell them what to do, when information was expensive to move and the simplest way of doing it was to move it up a hierarchy. None of these things are true anymore, but we're still stuck here. And so we need to shift our paradigm. We need to shift the problem we're working on. Yes, efficiency and compliance are important, but they're not as important. And so today I need to ask, how do I maximize contribution for impact? That's a different kind of a management model. And as we look at companies like Hire and Handelsbank and at Nucor, at Roche, the transformation they've been through, you see a very interesting new model emerging. And I can't go through this in any detail today, but I want to challenge you to learn from these vanguard companies I want to challenge you to 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 be skeptical of what you've inherited from the bureaucratic age, and to think more boldly about our management systems, just as today we have to think boldly about about our business models. So, 250 years ago, Thomas Paine, the great political thinker, spawned the American Revolution. But he said something then about aristocracy, which I would say today about bureaucracy. And he said this, he said, a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. And I can tell you, we will never build organizations that are as daring, as passionate, as creative as the people inside of them until we go back to first principles and we start to rebuild our management models based around the principles of ownership, meritocracy, transparency, openness, and so on. I know it can be done. I've helped it be done. I've seen it done. And I wish you great success as you do that journey for the sake of your organization and for the sake of everyone inside of it.
Great. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Professor Hamel. Couple of, I think, questions based on the conversation, and then, of course, also the topic today. One thing I think I did want to ask about was from if you were to look at how organizations might be able to measure the success of their efforts to rethink work, or embrace, I guess, the full potential of their staff or workforce. What do you think are some easier ways or methods companies or organizations can
Yeah,
take
I think
measure that?
Yeah, I think there are kind of four pieces to this, and obviously in this small time, I normally spend a few days working through these
Sure.
with a group of people. I would say motivation is number one. You really have to believe that we're at a point in time where we need kind of fundamental change. Now, part of that motivation, as you're suggesting, comes from measuring the effects that old management model is having in our organization. Now, you see that in engagement. By the way, many organizations lie to themselves about their employee engagement. If you use Gallup survey and you're 4.1.2, you do not have an engaged workforce. Gallup will tell you that all the engagement happens between 4.5 and 5. It does not. So let's not kid ourselves. We do not have engaged employees in most organizations. So yet very few organizations comprehensively measure the cost of bureaucratic drag. We built an instrument called the Bureaucratic Mass Index. It's used in companies like Ferrari and many others. And if you go to humanocracy.com/BMI, Bureaucratic Mass Index, you can find that. But it's a way of starting to measure how internally focused are we? How conservative are we? How much time are we wasting in pointless meetings? But we tend to pay attention to things that we can measure, so we need to start measuring that. Number two, we need actual new measures that measure not kind of whether employees are happy at work and whether they're engaged, but the extent to which we're actually getting at their initiative and their ingenuity. So we're working on new measures, and I can share them online or afterwards. We have a measure called the Ingenuity Index that we're looking at that says how good are we at turning on the inherent problem-solving skills of every employee. So absolutely, we need that data, and every manager at every level, every leader needs to be accountable for reducing the BMI and for increasing the data that says we're actually we're turning on the problem-solving skills of our people. Interesting, very large study, piece of research done a couple of years ago within the EU with 30,000 HR leaders. They found that the biggest thing that influences whether employees bring their ideas and their problem-solving skills to work is not the industry, not whether they've been trained, not their job. It's whether they are allowed to do it. So a lot of data there to be brought to the fore and taken seriously. And I think it's certainly the starting point in building the urgency and the awareness of what needs to change.
Sure. Great. Thank you. And I think I was thinking about it, and I personally care a lot about, let's say, diversity and inclusion in workplaces and what organizations are able to do or not doing maybe right now. But what do you think? How does that play into the organization's efforts in being able to harness that doing it,
So I
combining
think
with their
for
efforts?
me, inclusiveness and diversity are table stakes. Now, a lot of organizations have a lot of way to go there. But the value of diversity is not that you can just look around the table and say, it's wonderful we look like the United Nations, right? I mean, I guess that's a warm and fuzzy thing to say, and it's the right thing, kind of ethically and morally. But from business, the question is, how do you take advantage of that diversity? People who have different life experiences, who've learned different things and have different skills and mindsets. And what we know is our organizations are not equipped to do that today. Let me give you one other little thing you can actually measure. So I have a lot of CEOs, for example, who tell me their organizations are serious about innovation. I say, let's test this. Let's go talk to frontline employees in the call centers, tech support, sales, factories, distribution, frontline employees. And I asked them three questions. One, have you been trained to think like a business innovator? Has your company invested in your creative capital? Answer, no. Second question, is it very easy for you to find a few $1,000s and 50% of your time to start an experiment if you have an idea? Or is it like you wouldn't even know where to begin, a lot of bureaucracy, no clear path? Do you have some like internal Kickstarter? Answer, no. Third question, is it clear that your leader is accountable for innovation? Do they talk about the number of new ideas, how quick they get to market? Are they mentoring new ideas? Answer, no. So I have to go back to the CEO and say, you told me you were serious about innovation, but you haven't trained people, you don't make it easy, and you don't hold leaders accountable. Clearly, you are using a different definition of serious than I use, right? So I think diversity is this huge, wonderful raw material, but
Mhm.
most organizations are just really quite hopeless still at harnessing the economic power that is inherent in that diversity.
Sure, sure. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. I am in the human resources field. And yes, a lot of what you mentioned, what you talked about, definitely kind of touches on some of the things I kind of think about or learn about or practice it also. So definitely a lot of value there that I found, and I'm hoping that audiences have also found it very equally important and insightful. Thank you so much for your time today. I know we are almost getting close to the time, but we appreciate you coming in, having this conversation with us, and we hopefully will look at the book again. Hopefully I will go look at the book again and then see what it's all about. But we do appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
So happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.